Hey, when I was a kid, we used to start every Monday morning at school with an assembly. And this assembly followed the exact same pattern every week. We'd sing O Canada, we'd sing God Save the Queen, and then we would recite this prayer for our school. This is our school. Let peace dwell here. Let the rooms be filled with contentment. Let love abide here. Love of one another, love of mankind, love of life itself, and love of God. 40 years on and I still remember the prayer. I said it so many times. But when I was a little duffer in grade 5, I thought this must be the most important thing that we do, because we do this before we do anything else, and our principal is up front and our principal is leading these words. So I worked hard to learn them and to enthusiastically join my 5-year-old voice with the other voices that would hallow our gymnasium walls. And then we did it the next week. And the week after that, and every week through grade 1 and grade 2 and then grade 3. And at some point, the Monday morning ritual became so familiar that I could yawn my way through it. I could go on to autopilot, I could mumble the prayer, and I could sing the song all the while I'm doing a thumb war with my buddy. It lost any impact on me. It became this predictable ritual and not much more than that. Church can feel like that. Especially around Christmas. Because here's what I know. You can pretty much guess the songs we're going to sing. And you can pretty much guess that I'm going to talk about a baby. And I'm going to tell you that Jesus is the rizzle for the sizzle. And so I'm going to rage against consumerism and materialism like I did last year and the year before. And it's all so predictable. And I was wondering this week, how many more times do you need to hear about shepherds and frankincense and myrrh, whatever that is? I think it's at the Body Shop, but I'm not quite sure. How many more times do you need to hear about those things before you switch into autopilot mode through the Advent season? Well, I want to try to avoid that this morning. And so our Christmas sermon is going to be quite a bit different than other Christmas sermons that you might have heard here. Because I think one of the reasons we can find ourselves tuning out as we sink into the familiarity of the Christmas story is because we've made this story kind of a cutesy tale about teenage parents in a less than ideal maternity ward with animals and shepherds as, birth attendants. And it's a story that we can illustrate on a mantle, or we can illustrate on a front yard nativity. It's a story that's nostalgic. It fits on a Hallmark card. It's very, very tame. But the Christmas story, if it's true, is anything but tame. In fact, if it's true, it's utterly revolutionary. And I use that word on purpose because Mary gave birth to a 7-ish pound revolution. I don't know if Jesus was 7 pounds, but that's the average size of a baby. 7 pounds, 8 ounces. That's the average size of a baby. You didn't know that? And Jesus was like us in every way, and so I'm thinking he's probably 7 pounds, 8 ounces. But that's just me speculating. But he was 7 pounds of revolution born into the world. And both Luke and Matthew, who tell this story from two different vantage points, want us to see the Christmas story is a story about a kingdom that is unexpectedly breaking in to challenge the kingdoms of the day that are personified in Caesar and in Herod. Now Luke, he's a Roman. He's a Gentile, and he's writing to Romans, to Gentiles. And the first character in the Christmas story, you know what the first name Luke dropped in his Christmas story is the name Caesar Augustus. That's not coincidence. Now, to understand just how revolutionary Jesus' birth was and is, I need to tell you a little bit about these other leaders whose names are wedged into Jesus' story. Let me tell you a little bit about Caesar Augustus. He was the greatest leader of what is the world's first superpower. Superpower is a fitting description because Rome ruled from England all the way down to India. It was an empire that ruthlessly expanded, and it just kept enfolding more and more people into Rome's kingdom. Caesar Augustus took power in 27 BC. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He showed his penchant for military genius when he defeated Mark Antony and Elizabeth Taylor in Egypt. Hey, some of you are of a generation, you know what that is. Some of the younger ones are like, Elizabeth Taylor, I don't remember that name. Good job, good job. Thank you for the obligatory laugh that you have no idea Elizabeth Taylor is. At Caesar's inauguration, it was decreed that he was, quote, the incarnation of the gods on earth. He built temples in his name in every corner of the empire, including Israel. And so Augustus fanned this empire-wide propaganda that he had divine authority. And he used every kind of means he could. In Rome, there was a poet named Virgil. He's famous. He's still famous today. He was like the rock star of his age. And Virgil wrote this about Augustus's birth. Look what he wrote. Now is a child engendered by heaven. Smile at the birth of this boy who will put an end to our wretched age, from whom golden people shall spring. Not sure what golden people are, but that's who it's going to spring. Sounds a bit Aryan to me. But anyway, golden people shall spring. Now does your own Apollo reign. Does that not sound eerily familiar to something in Isaiah chapter 9? Anyway, so the Roman world is told that Augustus is more than just a man. He's born with divine intent who is going to bring in a new and better kingdom. Look what else Virgil said about Augustus. The one who is to come is to be the divine king of salvation for whom mankind has waited. He will annihilate the evil of the past. He will free his people from unceasing fear. He will establish the universal empire of peace, and he will lead into a golden age, the blessed renewed age of humanity. Tied to Caesar is this propaganda that he is going to bring salvation, him alone, and he is going to bring peace. And actually, Virgil, for a while, he looked like a first-rate prophet. Because there came a time when Caesar Augustus announced the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. After hundreds of years of bloody wars and like horrible infighting and civil wars and rebellions, Caesar Augustus launched this age of actually relative peace. It was an age of stability in the empire, and it brought an economic and a social thriving. Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Now, of course, it was a peace that was won through ruthlessness. Remember, it is Rome that developed the whole idea of a cross. It was like they had a competition for the most horrible way to execute somebody that would terrorize a population into submission, and that was the winning entry. We read that there was an uprising in Judea, and the Roman general Titus crucified so many Hebrews in this uprising that they ran out of spaces for crosses, and they ran out of crosses to nail people to. And in fact, Josephus says that the executioners got bored, and so they nailed people in different positions to amuse themselves. There was a waiting list for crosses. Josephus, the historian, also tells us about a city in Galilee called Sepphoris. It was known as the Orient of the Galilee. It was about 3.5 miles from Nazareth. Jesus undoubtedly would have worked in this city when he was apprenticing under his dad as a tradesperson. And this was a site of a Jewish uprising when Jesus was a teenager. And the Roman governor Varus had the city leveled and burned, and he had 2,000 men crucified. So Sepphoris is no more. It was wiped off the map. So the Pax Romana that Augustus brought was smashed into his subjects. Now, once he declared Pax Romana, and once his rule was secure, and his name is being revered and worshipped all over the empire in temples, there was a slogan that began, that took hold in the empire. And the slogan was this: Caesar Kyrios. Caesar is Lord. And it's a slogan that actually evolved into a mandatory profession of all the subjects of the empire. You had to declare that Caesar is Lord. You had to signal your devotion to the eternal kingdom of Rome and to Caesar Augustus as its head. And this was a slogan that was ringing throughout the empire when a baby is born to his Jewish girl who is going to make claims about a different kind of kingdom, who is going to call himself the Lord of Lords. Tell me that's not political. Luke, by beginning his story with the first name, Caesar Augustus, and having the angels declare to the shepherds, behold, in Bethlehem is born the Lord, is trying to show that these two, arguably the greatest historical figures of the ancient world, are breathing the same air at the same time, and there's going to be a collision course between their two kingdoms. Now Matthew's not writing to Gentiles. Matthew is writing to Jews. And so Matthew doesn't tell us about the name Caesar Augustus. He links Jesus' birth to another leader who's more familiar to the Jews than distant Caesar, and that's King Herod. He introduces Jesus as the coming king in light of Herod, who is Israel's actual king. Matthew pens the opening scenes for the first ever Game of Thrones. And Herod, he is a character that HBO is like, he's perfect for HBO. Let me tell you a little bit about Herod. Now, he showed his prowess on the battlefield, so much so that he was appointed by the Roman Senate to rule the Jews under the authority of Caesar. Herod was obsessed with power. He was constantly trying to expand his own and paranoid about losing his. And so there was a ruthlessness to Herod. In fact, he was so paranoid that he had a wife named Miriam, and by all accounts, he loved his wife. But he suspected, unfoundedly, that she was plotting against him, and so he murdered her. And then he felt bad about what he did, and he grieved her loss, and so he set up a national beauty contest around the country to find the woman in Israel who most looked like his dead wife, find her doppelganger. He married her, and he changed her name to his dead wife's name. Right? Tell me that's not like House Lannister. That is totally, like, Herod is perfect for the Game of Thrones. And then he suspected that his new wife was also plotting against her, so he told her, I'm going away on business. If anything that happens to me, you shall be executed. And then he came back, and they went to marriage counseling. And Herod commented that she was emotionally unavailable and aloof, and they worked through it. Okay, I'm joking. But what's not a joke is that he even drowned his two sons in the family pool. He was threatened that they might try to take over. While Herod was on his deathbed, his body was rotting away from a combination of syphilis and gangrene. He ordered that the most popular and influential people in Israel be arrested and be brought to Jericho, where he was convalescing. And he gave the order that at the moment of his death, they shall all be executed. So that, quote, I may be guaranteed weeping and mourning in all of Israel on the day of my death. That's Herod. Now, mercifully, his son, when he died, rescinded the order. So eliminating some babies in Bethlehem, that's pretty much par for the course for how Herod has operated. But surprisingly, Herod isn't best remembered for how ruthless he was. He is best remembered for his incredible vision and his ability to dominate the physical landscape. He was the unparalleled builder of the ancient age. He built Masada. Which is this palace fortress in the middle of the Judean desert. Like, it's in the middle of nowhere. I've been there. There is like nothing there. That little bit of water up on the top, that's the Dead Sea. It's like a wasteland. He took a literal whole mountain, and it looks like a giant aircraft carrier, and he built a fortress on top of it. Now, why would he build here? Because this was where Israel's greatest king, David, hid out in caves when he was running from Saul. And Herod said, where Israel's greatest king was forced to hide, I will live in luxury. And Masada is a place of luxury. He had hot tubs there. He had swimming pools, massive swimming pools, in a place where there's no rain. Like, how do you get the water to do that? Well, what Herod had done, he had his engineers dig these massive cisterns down into the mountain, and when it rains there, it comes down like, it's all rock, so you get these flash floods, and you get these wadis and creeks that fill up and they rage water. He had all the wadis diverted to fill up his cisterns underneath the mountain, where he had millions and millions of gallons of water. He had enough water and enough provisions to keep 10,000 people alive for 10 years. Archaeologists have uncovered figs that are still preserved, and they tried them. And then they tried Herod's commode that he had built. I don't know if that's true. I'm just making that up. Let me show you what else Herod built. The temple in Jesus' age. He had this thing built, and it was massive beyond belief. Now, the temple was on a mountain that was kind of shaped like an egg, kind of like a ridge, and it actually has kind of a small area to build upon. And so the temple before this was actually quite small. And Herod said it's way too small. So he had these massive retaining walls on both valleys built up hundreds of feet high, and then he backfilled the retaining wall, so he leveled the whole mountain. He basically buried the whole ridge under this flat platform, and he built the largest religious structure in the ancient world, big enough to house 500,000 worshippers. There are stones in the wall that I have seen, and they are 16 feet long, they are 4 feet high, they are 8 feet deep, they weigh over 500 tons. And the biggest stones in the pyramid in Egypt are 5 tons. These are 100 times bigger, and we have no idea how they moved them and engineered them. Because we do know that Josephus says because the place was holy and sacred, there was no work allowed to be done, no chipping and chiseling on the temple site. They had to be carved somewhere else and moved and fit into place. How he did it, we don't know. But he did it. And he paid for it himself. Herod's actually considered one of the wealthiest people who have ever lived. He had a personal payroll of over 500,000 people. He 1 year personally funded the Olympic Games. Him and Coca-Cola together, they paid for it. Now he got all this money because he oversaw the taxation of Israel, and the taxation was brutal. 50% taxation rate for fishermen, 25% taxation rate for all farmers. He personally controlled the spice trade that came from the east to Rome. Now he's always looking to expand his power and his influence and his wealth, and there's no great port in Israel, so all the shipping that had to happen went through the port, the main port, which was down in Alexandria, Egypt, and so he wanted to build a port. But the problem is there is actually no natural port along Israel's coast, and so he made one. He figured out how to pour concrete 80 feet underwater. The first one to do hydraulic concrete was Herod. And he made this massive, it was the largest man-made port in the ancient world. He named it after Caesar. He built a temple to Caesar there. He had a stadium. You can see that stadium in the kind of the middle foreground that sat 4,000 people. He had a hippodrome for races that sat 300,000 people in his hippodrome in Caesar, in the city that he built for Caesar. But the problem is there's no water there to drink. And so he built these aqueducts that run from the north that bring fresh water into the city every day, and they were engineered that for every meter of length they dropped 1 centimeter in elevation. This is Caesar. This is Herod. It is told by Josephus, a historian, that when Herod sailed into the city, he said it wasn't beautiful enough, and he ordered that the whole city, every building in the city, be finished and covered in white marble so that it would glow in the setting sun. And Josephus described it as the most breathtaking city in all the empire. Let me geek out for one more. This is the Herodian. I told you that Herod was paranoid and worried about losing his power, and so he had these fortresses built all over Israel that he could flee to in case there was an uprising or he was attacked. And he wanted one close to Jerusalem. So this one is built a few miles from Jerusalem, and he wanted it on a mountain, both for defensive purposes, but also so that it could get it up high enough that it would catch the cool breezes that come off the Mediterranean, because it's crazy hot in Israel in the summer, as you can imagine. The problem is there was no mountain that was suitable. And so he had this mountain built. It's round and it's shaped like a volcano. It's man-made. He had a mountain built, and he put an 8-story palace on top of it. It was the 3rd largest palace in the ancient world. And do you know where this is? This is in Bethlehem. Herod is a personification of power. He's a visionary who could impose his will on the landscape and the people who lived in that landscape. But he's an insecure king, because even though Caesar, who is the divine authority, right, the one who God has ordained to bring salvation and peace, even though Caesar decreed that Herod is king of the Jews, Herod is not Jewish. He's an Edomite from Idumea, which is a region just south of Israel. Now, why is that important? Well, in Genesis chapter 24, there's a lady named Rebekah, and she gives birth to 2 sons who will become 2 nations. Jacob, who will become what? Israel. Jacob, who will become Israel, and Esau, who is the Edomites. And in Numbers chapter 24, there's a prophecy by the prophet Balaam, who's speaking about Messiah, and he writes this: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel, and he will conquer Edom. So when some wise men show up to Herod and say, hey, where is the king of the Jews born? We saw his what? We saw his star. Herod, who is paranoid and power hungry and prophecy savvy, he wants to hold on to his kingdom the way that he knows how. And so, of course, he ruthlessly orders for all the boys in Bethlehem to be executed. He rightfully fears that Jesus' birth is the revolution come to liberate people from the lordship of Caesar, from the kingdom of Herod, and from all of our futile human efforts to build our own little kingdoms to save ourselves. Herod saw Jesus' birth as such. But it's not always easy for us to see it like that. Because here's the truth. The glory of the one kingdom is really easy to see. The one kingdom, the human kingdom marked by Caesar or Herod, you see human power flourishing. You see wealth is celebrated and amassed. It's a kingdom that's bejeweled in pomp and pageantry. And then you have Jesus' kingdom, adorned in weakness, birthed in this fragile seed of a little baby. And we are asked to believe that this is the real kingdom. And this is the better kingdom. He's a king that's not found perched on the highest, spire of a palace. He's not found in some temple. He's a king that's more at home amongst prisoners and refugees, amongst the outcasts and the brokenhearted. He's a king who proclaims a kingdom of loving sacrifice rather than continuing conquest. A kingdom wholly different from every other human kingdom, where the poor are blessed, and the meek, and the merciful, and the peacemakers find gateway into it. It's a kingdom not of this world, but a kingdom for this world. A kingdom that's going to touch down in this world and influence the entire world, but it takes faith to see it. And I can't help but wonder, on that first Christmas, shepherds who know the slogan, Caesar Kyrios, they know the power of Caesar. They have seen how impressive Herod is. Every time they go to the temple, they see how impressive it is. And they are called to go to Bethlehem to see this little baby who is born King of the Jews, who is the Lord that God has sent. And I can envision them walking towards the temple, walking towards Bethlehem, and over off to their right is, a few miles away, is the city of Jerusalem, and it's kind of glowing, and the highest part of the city, of course, is the temple up on the Temple Mount, and it's glowing from the torches, like hundreds and hundreds of torches. And so they see the glow there, and they see Herod's might there, and they have to pass right below the shadow of the Herodian, the mountain that Herod had built, his palace on top. And they are asked to believe that not Caesar, but this baby is Lord. That not Herod, but this little infant is the true king. And they had faith. They had the eyes to see it. But not everybody did, and not everybody does. Herod's kingdom missed its shot to wipe out the baby and destroy the potential kingdom threat that this baby brought. But years later, Rome wouldn't miss its opportunity. And this fragile seed of another kingdom would be nailed to the symbol of Roman power and would bleed out and would die. And the Game of Thrones is over. Jesus' kingdom is crushed under a Roman heel. And that's what everybody thought. But then something happened. Rumors started circulating that Jesus, the crucified king, was seen in Jerusalem, and he was seen in Judea, and he was even seen in the Galilee. And first it was individuals, and then it was tens, and then it was hundreds who claimed to see him, claimed that he was alive. And his resurrection galvanized the courage and the conviction of those first followers, and they began sharing the good news that God's kingdom has come. A kingdom not of this world, a kingdom for this world, a kingdom where a slaughtered Lamb of God is King and Lord. And the courage of these first followers, these first witnesses, was contagious. And word spread and faith blossomed, and passports into the kingdom were being stamped daily in the hundreds and in the thousands. And the kingdom started to spread. And it spread to places that the king never even went. It even spread to the heart of Rome itself. And Rome's effort to leverage all of its power and all of its might to stamp it out proved futile. And even though Jesus never set foot in Rome, in time, his symbol, his name, his likeness would adorn the city, not Caesar's. Caesar's temples, Herod's palaces will be no more. They will crumble into the dust of history. But it is this crucified king that will be worshipped by the empire that crucified him. Like, it's crazy. And Herod, for all of his wealth and all of his accomplishments, and Caesar, for all of his might and all of his vision, they will be remembered. Their names will be spoken aloud every year in homes and in places of worship all around the globe, not because of their kingdom, but because of the context and their proximity to his. It's always been a story of two opposing kingdoms. And it still is. And we live in the same tension between these two kingdoms, God's kingdom and this human-made kingdom that we are immersed in every day. One of the kingdoms is marked by achievement and accumulation of wealth and experiences of stuff that we think if we just amass enough of this stuff, it will bring our own version of Pax Romana, our own version of peace. But let me just ask a rhetorical question. How is it going? In this experiment of human kingdom building that we have 2,000 years to evolve and dial it in and get better, all that mankind has poured itself into to forge this human-centered kingdom, how much peace have we actually acquired? I've been reading this book by Yale professor and scholar. He's a secular Jew. His name is David Berlinski, and he teaches at Yale, and he writes this book called Human Nature. And I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the premise of his book is that we think the human species, our human nature, is evolving and it's perfecting and it's getting better. And he says, every empirical evidence tells us the exact opposite. Human nature is not improving. And he writes these words. He says that the 20th century was the most violent century in the history of the world. And he writes these words, 231 million men, women, and children died violently. Shot in open pits, murdered in secret police cellars, asphyxiated in Nazi gas ovens, the victims of deliberately contrived famines or lunatic industrial experiments where populations were ravaged by alien armies, bombed to smithereens, or sent to wander in their exiled millions across all the violated borders of Europe and Asia. And then he said, well, some historians say, well, that's just the first half of the 20th century. It kind of broke the bell curve. But from World War II onwards, we live in this time of great peace. And he says, oh, yeah? Put an asterisk beside that great peace. Because he continues, this great peace is one that encompassed Mao's Great Leap Forward, which left 56 million Chinese dead. It saw the partitioning of India, the suppression of Tibet, the Korean War, the French and American wars in Vietnam, the Egypt-Yemen War, the Franco-Algerian War, the Israeli-Arab Wars, the genocidal Pol Pot regime, the grotesque and sterile Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, ethnic cleansing in Rwanda, Burundi, the former Yugoslavia, and various massacres, subcontinental famines, squalid civil insurrections, bloodletting, throat slittings, death squads, suicide bombings, and airplanes smashed into skyscrapers. There is no great peace in our time. See, the evolution, the advancement of the human kingdoms has just made us technologically better at destroying each other. Now, if that's all too far removed, then that's not very Christmassy. It's going to get worse. I'm just warning you. Let me bring it a little bit closer to home. Let me bring it a little bit closer to the life that you and I live in, the place where we live. You see, we live in the promised land of Western consumeristic culture, where free market capitalism and the ability to buy whatever we want was supposed to bring us into a place of utopia. That was the promise. That is the promise that keeps getting delivered to us. Instead, it has delivered us to a place where loneliness is epidemic, despite all of our digital connectivity, where there is a rising inequality between the rich and the poor, where anxiety is running rampant. There is a widespread crisis for meaning, despite all of our affluence. We see the reawakening of nationalism and tribalism. There is a toxicity in the social sphere where citizens we disagree with are now demonized and denigrated. Addictions are skyrocketing. Suicide rates continue to climb every year since World War II. Life expectancy in the two most powerful Western nations, the United States and the UK, has been falling for the last 3 years running. And all of this should remind us that we need another kingdom. And so do they. Look, as improbable as it seemed on that first Christmas night, that this kingdom of this little baby would replace Rome, like how improbable, like how crazy. Nobody would accept that script for a movie line. Like that is science fiction of all science fiction. As improbable as it was, it happened. And do you know why it happened? Because men and women like you and me opened their mouths and proclaimed the resurrection hope of a better story. They told the gospel. They shared the gospel. They knew that Jesus' coming at Christmas was for something better than you opening new socks or underwear in a few weeks. They knew that His coming was to bring good news of great joy for all people. You see, Jesus' kingdom isn't just for the few. It's not for the connected or the cultural or spiritual elite. It's not just for the movers or the shakers, the put together that have it all figured out. His kingdom is radically inclusive for all and any who long for hope and peace and light and life and salvation, who would bend the knee and put their trust in the crucified King. And I think of that first night, where it's like as they pulled back the swaddling cloth, God was pulling back the curtain in the kingdom that is to come. And they faithed on it. And many after them faithed on it, and they saw it come. This Christmas, Jesus is wooing you to faith on it again. He's wooing you to come and to follow Him, to take up your cross, to lose your life to find it. And in that you'll find a promise that there is a life that's more powerful than death. That His kingdom will prevail, and He's inviting you and others into it. That is what Christmas is about, and it's revolutionary. And we need that revolution now. Because this is true. Every Herod breathes his last. Every Caesar dies, and comes alone to stand before the Lamb who is on the throne. And I will too, and so will you, and so will they. So for God's sake, let's open our mouths and share this Christmas about a better story and a better kingdom that has come, because everything depends on it. Let's pray. Lord, I love Christmas. I love everything about it except preaching at Christmas. I don't really love preaching at Christmas. I don't know why I just confessed that in front of people. It's because the story, I feel like we just get inoculated to it. But I love the season. I love the trees. I love the meals. I love the festivity. I love the gifts. I love the family time. And I just confess that this kingdom that we live in, that we all have to live in, it has won over so much of my mind. It has established and determined so much of my priorities. And then I read, and it's like the contrast gets turned up between your kingdom and the kingdom that I live in. Yeah. And I want us to prioritize what you prioritize. And I want us to pursue what you pursue, and I want to do that myself. And I have all these tethers that are holding me back to a lesser kingdom and a worse story, and so I get filled with anxiety, and I get stressed, and I look for my identity and my worth and stuff that has nothing to do with your kingdom. And I know my friends here are the same. Forgive us, Lord. Thank you for your continuing invitation to leave this kingdom behind us and step into a better story. Thank you that you have put your Spirit in us, that all the kingdom resources of heaven itself are in us, if we would just trust and listen and faith on and obey. And so, Lord, would you just hit reset on our awe of this little baby born? Would you hit reset that we would feel renewed boldness and joy and enthusiasm to share the story of a better kingdom into a time, into a culture that is racked with anxiety at all the failing promises of this human kingdom to deliver what we need. May that be an open door to talk about what you have done. Thank you, Jesus, that we're going to come to your table. And we know that the invitation to your kingdom, the doorway to your kingdom, is through a body broken and blood poured out. And even though we know in Rome that only few had citizenship, only the special, only those with influence, and only those with connections, and only those with money, they had citizenship. But in your kingdom, the ground is level, and we all come as equals. There is no hierarchy. There is no us and them. Anyone who would put their faith in this body broken, this blood poured out, is a citizen of a better kingdom. We don't earn it. We just receive it. And as we receive and remember again this morning, may the fires of your kingdom burn in us. May it lead us to act and proclaim the good news of great joy for all people. In Jesus' name, amen.